Good evening and welcome to Midnight Angels, the second in our six-part series of ReggieCon panels at Illinois State University. My name is Amelia Noel Elkins and I am the Interim Assistant Vice President for Student Success at Illinois State. We are thrilled tonight to join in the celebration of LGBT History Month through this conversation about the short-lived but exceptional series World of Wakanda. Before we begin the panel, just a few details to keep everything running smoothly for all of you in the audience. While the presenters' video and audio are on, we cannot see or hear any guests. The chat has been turned off for this event. However, feel free to use the Q&A function to ask questions of the presenters. After some initial discussion about World of Wakanda, our panelists will be taking questions from the attendees. Please know that this session is being recorded and will be archived on the ReggieCon website. If you need confirmation that you attended tonight's ReggieCon event, we will post a link for you to submit a request for confirmation of attendance. Also, please visit the ReggieCon website at illinoisstate.edu/ReggieCon for information about our other ReggieCon panels that will be held through the 2020 and 2021 academic year. Our next ReggieCon panel will occur in February. In recognition of Black History Month, we will continue our conversation about Black Panther and Wakanda. We hope that these panels can provide a foundation for a live and in-person ReggieCon in the future. At this time, I am pleased to introduce our moderator and panelist for this discussion of World of Wakanda, Dr. Scott Jordan, who is professor and chair of psychology here at Illinois State. Scott, I will hand it over to you to introduce yourself and the rest of the presenters.
Thank you, Amelia. Hello and welcome to ReggieCon, the con that asks the question, what's your story? In tonight's panel, we celebrate LGBTQ History Month with a discussion of Roxane Gay's GLAAD award-winning comic book series, World of Wakanda, issues 1 through 5. Before we begin tonight's panel, however, there are a few people we need to thank for their efforts on our behalf and for making ReggieCon something that actually happens. First of all, Dr. Amelia Noel Elkins, Dr. Jana Albrecht, Ms. Tracy Andrake, Mr. Sean Thornton, and Ms. Danny Schroeder. We truly appreciate your efforts on ReggieCon's behalf. I'd also like to give a special shout out to my daughter, Marissa Jordan Lentz, who made these fantastic t-shirts some of us are wearing tonight. They're fantastic, and thanks for all your hard work. And so tonight's panel. Our first panelist is Dr. Eric Wesselman, geek psychologist, expert in all things nerdy, my partner in WGLT Psychics Crime and dear friend, Dr. Eric Wesselman. As for Eric's geek cred, he is an experienced congoer who occasionally goes in for cosplay. We see him here channeling supernatural character Bobby Singer, letting us all know he believes we are, in fact, idiots. He's also a member of the dynamic duo known as the WGLT Psychics. He's a frequent contributor to Sterling's popular psychology series, edited by superheroologist Dr. Travis Langley. And he's currently the organizer of Normal Theater's Film Culture movie series. He also recently posted a talk on YouTube entitled Using Civil War to discuss freedom, security, and moral decision-making. If we ask nicely, Dr. Wesselman just might once again grace us with a soul-searing dramatic reading of his favorite panel from last month's graphic novel, Day Tripper. Unmute. Eric, read it for us.
Oh, now you put me on the spot.
I'm putting you on the spot, exactly.
Okay, all right. Here, get myself back in the frame of mind. So, should I give the context?
Yeah, a couple words of work.
Yeah. So, in this particular page in Day Tripper, the main character just coming back from a doctor's appointment, finding out that he's dying. He has the opportunity to try and do some invasive, aggressive treatments, but he's chosen not to, and so he's breaking this news to his partner. So we get the top panel establishing shot. some back and forths between them as she closes the distance to hug him, and she says, "I love you so much. I love you too, honey. We're going to be okay."
Can we get a round of applause for Dr.
And scene.
So, Eric, why are comics important to you?
How much time you got? I mean, I've enjoyed them all my life. First as a fan, and now as a psychology professor. I like to use comics to have students discuss relevant content that might otherwise be potentially difficult if we were talking about sort of real life experiences, theirs or other people's. I really enjoy using superhero comics to talk about the complexity of moral decision making. We like to pretend that moral decision making is simple, but in reality it's anything but. Comics afford us that opportunity to talk about that.
Thank you very much. Our next panelist is the one, the only Dr. Teresa Rojas, Professor of English at Modesto Junior College. She is also the director of the Latinx Comic Arts Festival. She is a frequent contributor to con panels, including this panel from this past summer's Comic-Con at Home, which you can find on YouTube, The Impact and Universality of Superhero Stories. And this panel from WonderCon at Home this past spring, Uniting Schools, Libraries, and Indie Comics. If you were able to join us last time for our discussion of Day Tripper, you will remember Dr. Rojas picked this image as her favorite from the graphic novel. When she sent it to me for her favorite page, I had to check my self-esteem just to make sure I wasn't currently vulnerable to any subliminal messaging. But Teresa, if I may, I'm thrilled you're with us again. And in terms of Teresa's geek cred, she single-handedly was responsible for the following event. There's a bit of admin I have to do here because it is 8 o'clock. So what I want to do...
Wait a second. We have a special guest, so we have to postpone the admin.
Yeah. No, we got to keep this going. Going.
Yeah. Have you seen our guest?
No way.
Fabio Moon is here.
Are you kidding?
Oh my God.
Oh my God.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Welcome.
How come I can't see him yet? Can you guys see him?
Yep, we sure can.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Thank you.
Hello.
Thank you. So,
Hi.
Well,
Hi.
we just got to hand the mic over to you, man.
No, I was curious. I was curious to see your perceptions of Day Tripper.
Mm.
And
I'm so excited.
Yeah, I was very flattered by everything that you said. And it's incredible that so many years later, like the book has been done for 10 years. So, and still it's been discovered last week by Victor or 2 years ago by Teresa.
Oh, Teresa, thank you so much for creating that moment last time.
I feel I will forever sparkle because of that moment. So thank you for replaying it.
You're more than welcome. Labor of love. So, Teresa, if I may, why are comic books important to you?
For moments like this, I mean, what else can I say, right? I have to mention that Fabio Moon was kind enough to also zoom into my class that is studying Day Tripper this semester. So I want to thank him again for that. That was incredibly generous. But as far as the importance of comics, to me, the number one thing is how comics allow us to tell any story anywhere, right? That's first. And I was fortunate to have grown up reading comics as a child. My mom would buy me comics, and then I returned to them as a PhD scholar at the Ohio State University. We have to say it right, Rachel?
In the house.
And Victor, where I developed a much deeper appreciation of comics as a medium for the simplest and most complex stories, which just constantly amazes me. So in studying comics, I'm able to bring together textual analysis, visual analysis, and I've mentioned this many times that I'm fascinated by the cognitive possibilities of comics. And they've brought many, many, many talented artists, writers, scholars, international intrigue into my life. And I'm constantly thankful for that. And in terms of my students, comics are it's an excellent way, super productive way for me to combine that analytical thinking and then also creating. And we always draw. I've mentioned this before when we're studying comics. And for many of them, it's the first time they've done any drawing since childhood. So it brings back that creative impulse. Right now, my students are doing, those who have chosen to do so are participating in Inktober. We're finishing that up. And they're tagging me on Instagram and on Twitter. And so I'm able to see everything from post-it drawings to these beautiful digital creations. And many of them have not done any of that sort of work since they were very, very young. And finally, all of this brought me to directing the Latinx Comic Arts Festival. So I'm eternally grateful to comics for that.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you very much. Our next panelist is the hardest working man in comics, our dear friend, Mr. Victor Dandridge Jr., founder of Vantage In-House Productions. As regards his geek cred, well, let's just say he's the one who bestows geek credibility upon the rest of us. Victor is the author of many comic book series, including The Trouble with Love, The Samaritan, Origins Unknown, Somewhere I Belong, and the wonderful family series, The Kinderguardians. Victor is also the founder of You Create Comics, a K-12 curriculum that teaches young people the power of creativity through the medium of comic books. Victor actually visited with children and parents at our local autism place last spring, and we can't wait to have him return. Again, if you were with us last month, you might remember Victor picked this image as his favorite and analyzed its underlying metaphysical imagery with a depth and clarity that left the rest of us wondering if perhaps we should mute our mics and cameras and simply allow Victor to finish the panel unencumbered by our obviously naive understanding of comics. You can see Victor and his kid crew throwing shade at us there.
Come on. It wouldn't be so bad if my daughter wasn't in that picture. My daughter is like right there in the center making the funniest face, so that's hilarious.
So Victor, why are comics so important to you?
Well, as everyone has kind of said, comics is my life. You know, it's what I do full time. It saved me as a child. But I think one of the biggest things is recognizing that comics are important to me because it's not just to me that they are important. They are a universal tool. They are the future of communication in a world that has, excuse me, varied in language and concepts. Comics seems to be a special language that has the unique qualities of something like music and visual art, by way of having an author be able to say something and that be interpreted by a reader or consumer and have a dialogue, even though you're separated by time, space, any number of things. There's a way that comic books will bridge gaps that we normally would never see, you know, brought together, as we are seeing in the daily life of how comic books have equated to transfer of information. If you go to a hospital, rather than it's simply being a conversation of how you feel, there's charts that kind of illustrate, and as a conceptual story, your internal feeling, a better way to communicate information that has been very elusive in the human experience, and comics have bridged that in a fantastic, beautiful way.
No, thank you very much, Victor.
Thank you.
Our next panelist is a slightly neurotic cognitive scientist philosopher from Illinois State University who frequently refers to himself in the third person. As regards his geek cred, he successfully cosplayed Jaime Lannister with his sister, who cosplayed Brienne of Tarth from the Game of Thrones episode The Bear and the Maiden Fair, ranking in the top 16 cosplayers at the first ever Con of Thrones. He too frequently contributes to Sterling's popular culture psychology series, edited by Dr. Travis Langley. And he recently started a YouTube channel called Dark Loops Productions, where he posts podcasts regarding live life, science, art, the humanities, and all things pop culture. He's currently podcasting HBO's fantastic series, Lovecraft Country, with a group known as the Seers of Artem. So, Scott, you know, why are comics important to you? Well, thanks for asking. I gotta say, I've always talked about the combination of the visual and the text and the interplay. And I'll say my favorite frame that I'm going to show tonight is this moment where the artwork does all the talking that the words never could, right? And so that combination of for a comic artist to know, when do I rely on text, when do I rely on image, how do I take advantage of the change in voice? It's like a good artist is always using themselves as audience to try to figure out what's going to work. And I'm very much just a fan of that, if you like, intertextual creativity. And of course, I read comics when I was a kid, and I have an amazing international comic book collection, which Victor and Eric can vouch for. So now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my personal pleasure and professional honor to introduce tonight's special guest panelist, Dr. Rachel Miller, instructor of art history and culture at Columbus College of Art and Design. Dr. Miller was the first assistant editor of the Comic Studies Society's official journal, Inks. Among her many awards, she was the recipient of Duke University's Mary Lilly Research Grant, which she used to help with her research on her dissertation topic, Immaterial Girls, Bedroom Culture, and the Ephemeral Archive in the 1990s. As a critic of contemporary independent and small press comics, Dr. Miller is a contributor to Public Books, a magazine of ideas, arts, and scholarship. You can also find her on YouTube conducting interviews for Small Press Expo. And while I couldn't find any record of Dr. Miller getting into cosplay, I did discover she harbors a rather robust penchant for self-referential avatars. So this avatar image comes the closest to qualifying as cosplay. However, further investigation revealed it's probably a Dungeons and Dragons inspired form of stepping into one's role, or as this image says, Dr. Rachel Miller at Girl Gutters, feminist media scholar, comics and cool girly trash, PhD, former assistant editor of Inks, in real life, chaotic good, big ratch energy. I knew that we had an excellent guest panelist coming on when I found that Twitter post. And you can also clearly see she is ranked among Twitter's most relevant people. So Dr. Miller, or if I may, Rachel, we're thrilled to have you joining us on the panel tonight. Please tell us why comics are important to you.
Thank you for having me. I'm so honored to be here, especially among so many amazing people. And I've been trying to answer this question, why comics are important to me, since you've sent it to me. It's a big question because it's like, comics are my life, comics save my life. But I'm just like sitting here looking at all the comics on my desk, and I have, World of Wakanda, got my issues of Twisted Sisters, and I also have my favorite thing is monsters. And I was just thinking about how all of these comics, in one way or another, kind of generate community. And that's something that I'm really focused on in my research, going into archives and uncovering networks that we might have forgotten in comics history. So for me, comics are important because of that communal aspect, and a lot, Victor, Teresa, Eric, and you, Scott, have all kind of touched on this in one way or another. But I just think that that's like the power of this medium, is it's a networking medium. It brings us together around this fire, this campfire called comics. So.
Oh, very cool. I'll have to remember that one. That's good. So,
thank you.
No, so I'm supposed to stop. I skipped that avatar. I was supposed to end on that one. I'm sorry. It's a beautiful picture. I'm supposed to stop sharing my screen now. I've done so. So, first question goes to Teresa. What struck you the most about the story of Anika and Io, excuse me. And the rest of you can have your mics on, by the way, unless it starts driving feedback.
And please feel free to chime in as well. But I interpret this question as, what do I love about this story? Because I really, really loved reading the whole thing. But particularly the story of the two of them feels very much like a real relationship struggle. And in many ways, Anika's struggle is that struggle to parse out your deeply complicated feelings when it comes to attraction and duty, right? So she's the captain, she's in charge, and Io, at least in the beginning, is an initiate who doesn't entirely respect her authority and says so. So there's that pushing against authority and then having to show your initiate, who's boss, and you're here to learn, you're here to train. But then at the same time, there's that chemistry. From the first moment, there's a chemistry that's building between them. And there's a power differential. That's huge. That I think she's struggling with that power differential. It seems less of an issue for Io, but there's that growing fondness that need to establish authority from both of them. Like, so you're getting the captain is trying to train you, and you're getting the initiate kind of like, hey, you don't have that much to show me. And I think that that's very attractive. I think that many of us have been in a situation where you are trying to exert your authority, and the pushback at once, it's like, oh, no, I am in charge here. But the way that pushback happens is kind of like, all right, well, what do you have to offer, right? So it creates a building of that chemistry. And I think that added complication is the commitment that both women have made to their positions as warriors of the Dora Milaje, right? So although it's become this antiquated tradition, or I don't know where we are in that timeline of the wives in training thing, but they're potential wives in training for the king. So they've both made this commitment, knowing this, and I think Anika, at least, is very much torn by those feelings, by that commitment, which she seems to take incredibly seriously. And then the last thing I want to say about this is that I also appreciate that although this is a same-sex relationship, that it's not the main focus of the struggle part. And I think that allows us to really think about all kinds of complex issues in the story, not the least of which is this idea of divided loyalty, which is clearly a central theme throughout this series, but also I think in the Black Panther universe in general.
No, that's fantastic. I would agree that the multiple tensions, particularly Anika's trying to address and keep herself moving through daily life, is really, really impressive. Victor, as a comic book author, what stands out to you about World of Wakanda, and in particular the story of Anika and Io?
There's a lot of things, and I want to be overt and honest when I say that I didn't love this book. I didn't enjoy it for the sake that it presents itself as backstory presentations where there is the main Black Panther storyline, and this is kind of I don't want to call it an afterthought, but it's so it's working so hard to weave within that narrative that this one almost doesn't feel as explored as it could be. So that's one thing that from my my comic book writing, I felt like there was a disservice to these characters and the exploration therein, because it was still trying to weave within the timeline of the core Black Panther title. What I first got out of this was the absolute fear that through the presentation of a same-sex relationship, that Wakanda was not nearly as progressive as we all want it to be. That the initial concept of these two women finding love in each other would not be allowed in Wakanda devastated me. Like it took a couple pages to realize that what the issue was the wives in training dutiful conflict, not an overt, we don't allow this in Wakanda. That would have definitely torn apart all my foundations of hope and love for what we thought that this progressive society represented. But the thing that really kind of got me about their relationship was the beautiful authenticity of it. You understood both parts, and that's really awesome if you're a comic book reader, a long-term Black Panther reader. It's terrible if you only come into it from the concept of the movies. And we kind of talked about how the movie sets a great stage for interest in Black Panther that the comics don't actually follow up on, where, as Teresa said, the wives in training aspect of the Dora Milaje as a function was what Christopher Priest created them for. That's not what they're represented as in the movie. They are just the bodyguard elite. So when you have this context of, oh, we're not supposed to have this relationship, it can become perplexing to, for lack of a better term, and I apologize for the derogatory nature of it, but the casual fan who saw the movie and wanted to come into the book series, you're talking a very different translation of character types, structure within the context of the story within Wakanda. There's a lot of misrepresentation and translations that can throw off, your appreciation of this. But the notion of Anika and Io's relationship not being what I feared it was the greatest part of reading this story. Like seeing how it is a true testament of love between two people, almost irrelevant of their gender. They pursue it with a tenacity that could tear down a kingdom, and I love that.
Yeah, and the timeline of their falling in love and the tensions they're addressing. The backstory in Black Panther really wasn't anything but a time placeholder. Right. There were no events other than they're finally going to, T'Challa and saying, dude, you've let people kill our people twice. We're done. Right. That mattered, but the whole content didn't. So I'm with you on the authenticity of the love story. I thought that was fantastic, but the rest, the backstory, yeah.
Can I point to a moment that I didn't like related to the love story? So I'm someone who, as Victor mentioned, actually did jump in from the movie. That was my only context. But it's been so long since I've seen the film. The last time I've seen the film, I've seen it a couple of times, that I was going into this more as a standalone. And then I'm also now reading the Ta-Nehisi Coates version of Black Panther. So I've just started that. But there's a moment when they're first together, and so there's that tension that builds, and then they're together, and we see I don't know if it's the morning after or a few hours after, whatever, but there's a moment when we see Io and so I need to hold it up for myself. And Anika says, Io, to love you would be to turn my back on the service I have given my life to. And then Io says, would that be a bad thing? Am I a bad thing? And in that panel, that moment really bothers me because not the question. I think the dialogue is great and I think it's perfect and it fits well. But the look on Io's face, she's like this. She's covering herself. And first of all, I was like, she's not going to be covering herself. This is a warrior woman. She's going to be like,
right.
Is that a bad thing? But I realized this is, PG. Right. But what really bothered me was the look on her face, how she's depicted as this sort of doll-faced woman with, teary-eyed, and this very weak, uncharacteristically weak moment where she's saying, what am I a bad thing? And I was just like, no, especially not after what's just happened. They are, strong in this moment, even though the struggle continues. So I had an issue with that, but we don't see that. We see it slightly again a little bit later, but we don't see a lot of that. So I was grateful for that. But in that moment, and I took a lot of time like digging into that moment going, no.
And later on, her retorts become, you won't have many more of these times to hurt me. Right. And, kind of the same thing. Eric, what did you find most interesting about World of Wakanda?
All right, unmute myself there.
There you go.
So one of the things that I'm interested in terms of psychology or become interested, is this idea of the self-concept of identity. And that's a tricky term. I mean, there's, you ask 5 psychologists to define what that is, and you're going to get 20 answers. But what we do know is that there are different aspects of ourself. We have our individual characteristics. If you were to ask, who am I, and answer that question, you would talk about, these individual characteristics like your interests, your skills. You would probably also talk about your self within the context of interpersonal relationships, right? And then you can even talk about yourself in the context of cultural categories, demographic groups, etc. And all of these things make up the concept that is you. So our self concepts are complex. We have multiple roles. Sometimes they fit together, sometimes they conflict. And we all vary in how much tension we can tolerate in those things. And what I thought was fascinating about the relationship between Anika and Io is that they're both dealing with those tensions in different ways. There's a theory called self-complexity theory, which argues that individuals who have more complex identities, they can tolerate more of the potential dissonance, if you will, or they can move in and out a lot easier. And Io has the way I read it, had a much more complex sense of self, right? Her role as Dora Milaje as an individual person, her relationship with Anika, she had no problem navigating those tensions, right? Whereas Anika had a lot more, right? And I'll when we get to our images later, I'll probably talk about this more, but for Anika, her role as Dora Milaje is like central, right? And everything else is within that. And so when those other aspects threaten her self-concept as Dora Milaje, she has a lot of hard time. And then Io has to come in and kind of help her navigate that tension. So I found that very interesting. I'll talk more about it later.
No, very, very cool. Very, very cool. So we're going to go to Rachel now. Rachel, where do you see the story of Anika and Io's struggle for LGBTQ identity situated in the history of LGBTQ comics in general?
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of the comics that I research or look at fall like way outside of the mainstream. I particularly focus on comics that were self-published by girls and young women during the 1990s. So this kind of whole underground scene that was happening at the time. But I think it's interesting in terms of this book and Io and Anika's love story, just how, I think someone was talking about this earlier, but just how it flies in the face of a lot of the structures of Wakanda that we are given in this text, and how it challenges our symbol of the Black Panther universe, T'Challa, and even Queen Shuri. This is a time of great change in Wakanda that seems to issue out of this love story. So it's interesting to think about that in terms of the changes that are ongoing right now in the mainstream comic book industry. So at Marvel and at DC, I think that we're grappling with the ways in which, queer love stories or representing any historically marginalized group is challenging and shifting structures that have been in place for a long time in the mainstream industry to kind of suppress those groups. So it was interesting for me how their relationship and the kind of structural change that introduces into Wakanda, whether overtly or not so overtly, mirrors that shifting that's happening right now in the mainstream industry and how we're grappling with these changes, which to my mind, I want way more queer romances. I want way more stories like this to come out of Marvel and DC. So.
No, it's fantastic. That's fantastic. And I like your comment that it's sort of reflecting the space we're living in. A lot of times when those who are here talk about comics, we talk about there being this kind of Trojan horse mechanism that lets you talk about contemporary events in ways that aren't initially maybe not obvious to some, so they can get in and then maybe change things after that, after they're in there. So I'm quickly going to say a few words about why I picked this story. First of all, in celebration of LGBTQ History Month, I wanted to pick a story along these lines. But I'm a huge fan of Ta-Nehisi Coates' run on Black Panther. The take-home message from that arc is no one man. So for the Black Panther arc to actually challenge monarchy, which is at the root of Wakandan culture, for me was a very bold piece of writing. And it allowed Ta-Nehisi Coates to bring in a lot of James Baldwin references, Dumas references, and sort of educate the culture about things that have been said that we may not know have been said. so I really, really enjoyed that. And then to have this story told against the backdrop of that is kind of doubly complex, because T'Challa is trying to reorganize what Wakanda is in terms of what his father did, right? T'Challa is trying to open Wakanda to the world, and these women are trying to open Wakanda to love, a different kind of love. So everybody in Wakanda has this space where they're struggling with these issues. And as I said, as Teresa said, I liked the fact that this was about more than just their individual relationship, right? They brought their whole world into their relationship, and that was very important. And I thought it would give us a lot of space to discuss things. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to start sharing my screen again. And given his penchant for beautiful dramatic readings, we're going to start with Eric. So desktop 2, let's make sure this works. All right, so Eric, this is your chosen panel. Why'd you choose this? Oh, this is a page, actually. Why'd you choose this page?
So this is the the last page of issue 2, I believe, and this sort of gets back to what I was describing earlier about the sort of negotiation that both of these characters had in terms of their own individual identities, and then ultimately their interdependent identity, right? Their collective identity in terms of their relationship. And so what we're seeing here is Anika, who is the sort of commanding officer of the Dora Milaje, and she's sort of, this is during the events you were talking about earlier, where lots of tragedies are occurring in Wakanda, lots of citizens are dying, and they're finding out that T'Challa is not doing what they think he should be to protect the citizens. And so, like what Anika's saying here at the end of her first speech balloon is, she says the sentence, "Who am I if I am not Dora Milaje?" Right? And then so Io comes in and is talking about how she's much more than that. And then where I'm actually going to start reading is where we come down here to the last, the bottom of the page, the lower third. And Anika's just basically said, "I'm your commanding officer. Who are you to give me strength?" Right? And Io says, "Sometimes you know best. Sometimes I know best. Between the two of us, one of us will always know something. Now stand up and hold your head high." They come together. Anika says, "So much of what lies before us is unknown." Io replies, "I do not know what the future holds, but I do know things will be different. We will be different." And just what I love about how this page ends is, research on interpersonal relationships, particularly romantic relationships, talk about how the most committed, most healthy relationships are the ones in which we have mutual interdependence. One person's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors impact their partners and vice versa, and they lean on each other. They sort of, each person becomes more than just themselves. They bring each other into their self-concept. And that's how I experienced reading this particular page, as Io helps Anika expand her own complexity of self. And then there are other times where each one sort of leans on the other. But that I just thought was a perfect sort of summary in this page.
No, that's fantastic, because they do change. Right, and then they become, in a sense, one, not in a sense just one person, but become a relationship. Victor, this was your chosen page.
Yes, what I think this page ultimately speaks to is the beautiful complexity that comic book storytelling can show you, where there's one thing that you can see, and there's an entirely different story going on underneath it that, once revealed, has a totally different context. So if you want me to read this one.
Oh yeah.
Okay, hold on. Let me move everybody's window. I currently have my page covered up here. Okay, so we're gonna do a Now then, let the training begin. And in this internal monologue, we have Anika, who has just failed Io with a smooth karate chop to the throat, embarrassing her in front of everyone, including Captain Anika's own commanding officer. She looks at the window, seeing somewhat the disapproving look from her commanding officer, and thinks to herself, I did what I had to do. The defiant among these girls must be broken before they can be built into what Wakanda needs them to be. And what makes it so amazing is, yet again, you have so many different storylines that are happening. They've already had a flirtatious interaction to wit already, so there's already this kind of underpinning of tension that seems to be, sexually motivated between them. But then there's also the job. And as we, later on know that Captain Anika is all about the job in a way that, I almost can't reconcile. Why are you so devolving of self in lieu of this position? And when it comes down to it, as much as Io thinks so highly of herself, believing that Captain Anika can't train her, can't show her anything, Captain Anika shows her the exact opposite. No. I am better than you are giving me credit for. However, she is clearly bothered by the fact that she did this and is trying to justify in her role as the captain why she took this action, not only just against a trainee, but somebody who she's clearly interested in other, means, other facets. And it's a really great bit of storytelling that she is seemingly explaining this non-verbally to her commanding officer, who is one of the first persons to not only recognize that there is a growing relationship between Captain Anika and Io, but to approve of it and say, embrace that feeling, embrace that love that you have. It's there for a reason, and it's yours. You should celebrate it. So there's so much context that's happening in what could easily be looked at as a juvenile fight scene of two people. Very well drawn. I adore the emotional aspect, the motion, all of it is fantastic, but it's the underlying story that is actually happening at the exact same time that is absolutely brilliant. It is the greatest joy of, what comic book reading really does. When you see the actual jagged framework of this panel border, it speaks of action. You know what I mean? Like that's magic. You don't change necessarily the frame. Maybe you can change the angle. Maybe you can change the speed in film to kind of, relegate some sense of action. But you viscerally understand that this is a jagged, jarring image because of how it's framed. And again, this is just the totality of great comic book storytelling. Not just storytelling, comic book storytelling.
I have to agree. I absolutely love, I almost adore a jagged panel that is well placed, that is well used, not just for the sake of throwing it in there, but that really adds to the action. It's a cue, right? It's a mental cue for us. It creates geometry. So I agree 100%.
And it's also kind of cutting against it kind of that crooked frame kind of also speaks to the conflicting emotions Anika's sort of having. It's the disruptive and the power of comics, that bottom frame. If you had to explain that in words, you could, but you don't need to. Right. And then when she's looking through the window and she sees her teacher looking at her, she's actually overcoming her own cognitive dissonance by telling her a story about why she just did this, right? And I love the work it forces the reader to do. You have to look at all these different characters, put it together, and generate what psychologists call theory of mind to sort of create a story for yourself about what's really going on. That's fantastic. So look, we have a first here for ReggieCon. We have two people who picked the same panel. So Teresa and Rachel picked the same panel. So I'm thinking what we do, and I guess we can't have them not hear each other, but it'll be fun to hear them each give their own independent.
You know what? Why don't we have, if Rachel would like to go first, since she's our special guest, I will.
Well, it's been, let's make it so. So Rachel,
go for it, Rachel.
You selected this panel.
Yes.
Wait. Before you get started, Rachel, I'm so sorry. I almost picked this panel too.
So did I.
This close.
Everyone who spent time in Columbus.
I was gonna say that's what it is. It's the Columbus
Triangle.
What it is. Okay.
The Columbus Mafia is what it is.
It's the Columbus synergy. Yeah. I mean, so I was interested, like we talked a lot about the authenticity in Io and Annika's relationship and just how like beautifully rendered that relationship is. And I chose this panel because I was struck by just not just how their relationship was like emotionally authentic, but also, so here we have Salome, and this is like our villain, I guess, for this book. She's not really super villain, but this is kind of her origin story of becoming a villain. And I was really struck by just how the emotional depth that was captured in these pages. A lot of the time, rage and anger in comics is very masculine, and if it's given to women, it can often be very alienating. So the reader doesn't really understand that women's anger. But in these panels, I think you see like all these, you see grief, you see, anger, you see rage, and sadness, like all compounded in this sequence. And I was really struck by that emotional depth, but also then, the ways in which this like breaks or bends stereotypes in terms of the character that we're getting here. Like, I think in a lot of literature, for Black women to express any sort of negative emotions is immediately, it stereotypes them in a certain way, right? There's this like trope of an angry Black woman, but here we see that anger and rage have so many dimensions to them, and I think it kind of breaks away from those stereotypes. And the last thing I'll say about it before I hand it over to Teresa is that it reminded me, actually, in a weird way, of a newspaper artist named Barbara Brandencroft. She wrote a strip called Where I'm Coming From that is all, it centers around Black women talking one-on-one to the reader, and it kind of locks in on their faces. So it's this very like intimate exchange and very like radical and nuanced way to depict Black women, especially for newspaper comics. So I was interested in how like we get this arrested series of panels that are really focused on like from the chest up on this character. So yeah, that's why I chose it, and I hopefully Teresa, will bring more insight to this panel as well.
I love it. I feel it's funny because you mentioned things that I haven't thought of. So I was thinking about this in terms of, so this moment, this is right after Fulami gets the news that her father, the chieftain, has been killed. And the chieftain has been accused of raping members of his own village. And she suspects that Annika and Io are responsible, and Annika goes to go and see what's going on, and she witnesses the beginning of a young girl about to be raped, about to be, not only that, but a cage full of women. So in the previous page right before this, Fulami's mother has given her the news, and what she calls it the unbearable news, and that the chieftain was found lying dead in a pool of his own cold blood. I thought that was kind of interesting, that not just his blood, but his own cold blood, suggesting that it's a cold-blooded murder, right? And a sight that her mother calls, what does she call it? She said she cannot unsee it. So I think that's quite powerful. So then we have this dramatic revelation for Fulami, and we see her reaction in this page, and it is deeply emotional. We see that she looks like she's going to vomit. She screams, no. I almost want to have Eric just scream, no. she's brought to her knees. She picks up a knife. She cuts her hand, and then she says, for those who can't read the dialogue, it says, Annika and Io, I know you are behind this. You will pay for what you have done to my father. I will avenge his death with my bare hands. And then as she spreads the blood onto her face, she says, for now, I have become rage. So for me, I was thinking about this when I was flipping through, because what I like to do before I read a comic is I like to flip through the entire thing to get a preview, which in some ways spoils it in the moment if there's, like a jump and things like that. But not really, because I forget. There's a squirrel and I forget it immediately once I start reading the comic. So I did that, and this stood out in my original flip through, and then it stood out again when I was reading the comic, because I'm always interested in how we read directionally, and I'm always thinking about my students and how they might read this. And I like that you can read it in a couple of different ways and it still makes sense. So the first thing is, I thought originally when I saw it, I thought she was scraping her cheeks open, right? I thought she was just tearing. That's what it looks like. And I think that that's intentional, that it looks, that's the power of this rage in this moment. And then, but when we read it, we see, oh, actually she's cutting her hand, and what she's doing is she's sort of putting on the paint and getting ready for war, right? And so that shifts it a little bit, but I really like that. And so I think that we can read it in this way, that we start with the almost vomiting, and then the no, and then the picking up the knife and the cut, and then that final putting on of the blood. Or we can read it straight down the side of the page, down the left side of the page, and then pop back up to this emotional no, and then we get to the paint on the face. And then what we can just say is that in the gaps is when she picks up the knife that you don't see in that in that moment of before we even bring that up. Wait a minute, where did the knife go? But what I want to say is that the irony of this moment that strikes me is that her rage is entirely misplaced, right? I mean, yes, angry at her father is dead, but her father is a rapist. Her father is a rapist. I need to say that again, of his own village. And Anika puts a stop to that. So there's a justice in that is not acknowledged in this moment, right? Because she's really caught up in what has happened.
Can I jump in and comment on the notion of Fulani being a very interesting adversary to the Anika Io relationship, because she's not a romantic oppositional force to it, but she definitely throws in Io to this conversation when Io had nothing to do with the actual death of her father, which is, it becomes this very interesting sort of idea where she is lumping them together as one unit of an individual, even though they still can act autonomously of one another and the whole nine. I think that's something that's really beautiful in the way that it almost gives like a validation to their relationship and their, united front, in the sense that, she's actually blaming a component of the relationship that did nothing in this situation. Not even saying like nothing wrong, was not even present at the turn of the death of her father. I also wanted to throw out, as you were talking about, Teresa, there are subtle clues that actually will show you how you're supposed to read this from an art standpoint, which I think is so wonderful. And again, speaks to the beauty of how comics work, where the panels bleed into one another to show you a directional flow. So when you have her busting out of the hut, covering up her mouth as though she's going to vomit, the overlap of the next panel, the headpiece and the finger, kind of leads you into that giant panel where it says no. And then also the finger and the word no itself leads you backwards into the panel where you can subtly, very subtly, because you definitely will miss it on the first read, that she's pulling this knife out of her pocket. Because like you, I definitely thought that she was tearing at her face. And I was like, oh my gosh, she mad. She like, that's big mad. That's a totally different level of angry. But you read it in a different way, and you can see very subtly how the sense of overlap, which is, a fantastic art principle to show distance and time, is a way to kind of lead you through the reading of this section. I think that's really well done.
And I love this page as a teaching tool for exactly what you've just mentioned, Victor, to say, look, these are the clues. This is how it was intended to be read. But what happens when our eye goes in a different direction? Does it still make sense? And sometimes it doesn't. It completely messes the story up. But what I appreciate about this page is that it does. It does make sense when you read it a little bit differently. And then also, to a point that you made earlier, this, I think, connects back to that idea that Fulani is jealous of that relationship. And she even says the one person that Anika pays attention to is Io, the one person, which to me is her saying, what about me? So she's got no mentor, she's got no guidance, she's got no other, love in her life the way that they do. And she feels the power of that relationship, and she feels very much left out. So then there's that lumping together of, well, you know what, the two of you are going to pay for this. I don't even care who was responsible. I know it was you as one entity.
Yeah, I really like your comment. Oh, go ahead, Eric.
If you're gonna sort of build off of what Teresa said, you go ahead and then I'll.
I was just going to say, even though she's using the words for other people's names, she really hates herself right now. She really, really hates her life. As Eric was talking about self-concept, it has just collapsed, right? She's been using the sanctity of her father as a leader to try to be someone like that. And she's been putting it all out against, Anika and Ao, and it just fell out from underneath her now. And I think that's one of the reasons they rendered her as basically destroying herself, is because in the end, she's really, really mad at herself.
Yeah, I
That's
mean,
why
I think
she's. Oh, go ahead.
it kind of it goes to show the extent to which, again, these like structures that are in place in Wakanda are hurting those who are, more vulnerable. So like the patriarchy hurts basically, and we see that with this character certainly.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that in the sense that she is giving up her own name and declaring that she is now Rage,
Yeah.
I don't think that's just a concept or a feeling. That's literally an identity that she is now claiming over being, of the village, Fulami, like any of that. She is now, I'm not even Wakandan. I am Rage, period. That's it.
Yeah.
One thing I like about the structure of this page, and it kind of gets at something that you were all talking about, is this in sort of the upper right / center image of Fulami screaming, both her hand, well, her body in that sort of frame, non-frame, if you will, and no, that's sort of at the very forefront of the image. It's overlaid over almost everything else. So for me, as I read this, I almost feel like I should have an eye tracker on. But I keep coming back to her screaming. So although linearly, if we're to go left to right, top to bottom, it's the sort of second event. It's omnipresent for me as a reader, because every time I go to one of the other frames as I'm going to the next one, my eye is drawn back to her screaming with the no. So I sort of experience that as just omnipresent.
Can I just volunteer for an eye tracker the next time you need a person? Just send it to me. I am a crazy visual reader, and I'm always kind of going back and doing this and that. And I noticed it quite a bit with the reading of this book, because I was part of me is trying to fill in gaps for the larger universe, but also I'm looking at how we read, how I read a story, and then thinking about how are my students potentially reading this story. So you said eye tracker. The nerd in me is like, ooh.
So it's about 8:00. I'm looking at the queue. I don't see any questions. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do my image, and we'll see if we get any questions in the queue, and we'll just take it from there. So this is the frame that I picked. And if we're going to have a love story, we've got to have sensuality. And how they were going to deal with sensuality visually was a big part of the decision making, I'm sure. And it's not even the whole page that does it for me, honestly, because this is the first time where their bodies touch in any kind of affectionate way, right? They've been fighting each other, but not in any affectionate way. And you see Io puts her hand on Anika's face, and you see that next frame. And that next frame is stunning. And here's why. Because what Anika has done is taken Io's hand, which Io put on her face, and Anika has put her hand on Io's face and brought her hands to her lips. So instead of extending her lips to kiss Io's hand, she has moved Io's hand onto her lips. What I love about that is there are two different forms of agency. to actually put your lips out to kiss someone is, you can't come back from that. You know, socially, it's all, your intention is always clear. But this gives you total deniability. Oh, I just had a spasm and I moved your hand closer to my face. But you notice that her lips, at least the way I'm looking at that scene, don't look like they're particularly pursed to deliver a kiss. There's no move in her body forward. I bet you they had a lot of conversations about how are their bodies going to make contact gradually to the point of where they are later in the story. And I really like the kind of thought that I think went into this image. It's a very sexy image, very sensual image, but it's got all the right complex agency. And that's why I really, really like it.
I think something that also comes up on this page is the idea of the intimacy of athleticism, and how when you're training like that with someone and you're training very closely with them, that it really does, you do develop an intimate connection with that person. And if there's already attraction and chemistry, that added athleticism really, really just raises the intimacy level.
And you know, it's interesting you say that, because in the movie, when we see Killmonger and T'Challa have the fight at the falls, they're actually resonating to each other in the moment of the fight. And one of the things I would argue, it's that actual resonance, because you have to let the other person into your planning if you're going to effectively combat them, right? It's that letting the other in, as long as they do in that way, that actually starts to open up T'Challa's mind to Killmonger's plight and leads to what goes on in the rest of the movie. So, hey, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. At the moment, I don't see any questions in the queue. Is that correct for those who are running the show? Amelia, am I correct that there are no questions?
Seeing any questions?
Okay, so it's 8:05. This is scheduled to go to 7, from 7 to 8. I don't necessarily feel like I want to stop talking, and we have people who are still here. So what I also asked the panel to do is come up with their favorite line or their favorite character. And I'm just going to open the floor to that, and we're just going to let the conversation be spontaneous from here out until someone turns the lights off and tells us it's time to go home.
I will openly say that I didn't have one. As not necessarily enjoying the totality of what this story was, because it was such a tie-in piece. There was always something that felt very handicapped, so I didn't fully love it. What I did want to throw out though, as a visual aspect, so Captain Anika has a very, those short-haired, very traditional feminine look, and Io does not, with the shaved head, with the ponytail. It is a bit more radical. And I wonder if that was a visual representation of the fact that Io would be someone who would clearly lean into her own natural individual tendencies, feelings, interests, inclinations, whereas Anika would not necessarily do that. Because as you can see, especially on the page that you pointed out, Scott, that Io is the one that is the aggressor.
Yeah.
Romantically, like she is fully embracing of who she is as a person, as radical as that might be to anyone else's interest. And I wonder if that was, visually a cue of that.
Yeah, I would agree. Eric talked about self-complexity earlier. I would also argue that because Anika has these responsibilities that she's worked all her life to become the leader, there are complexities that she has to deal with that are very constraining, that Io does not yet have to address. And so I thought they handled this sort of Io's, what looks like her openness is, I would argue that she's just not as constrained in terms of where she's moved her identity. Anika didn't have to do that. And if you're going to actually spend your life being ambitious and try to be in charge, you're going to have to let all of these constraints into how you do your life every day. And so then when Anika's self-concept, as Eric referred to it, or her simple world is this system of constraints that she's embodied, that's a denser space, I think, than Oyo has to deal with. So for me, I personally enjoyed Anika's struggle. I enjoyed her emotional oscillations. I liked how Ayo really couldn't understand it sometime, and I think that was kind of authentic because Ayo just doesn't live in the same constraints that Anika does. So I think the hairstyle was there definitely as a cue to sort of keep that going.
And we could I find the point that you make about Anika's the constraints on her as she's sort of gone up the ranks in the Dora Milaje interesting, because then you can contrast her with who my favorite character is, Mr. Zola. I mean, I wanted a lot more of Mr. Zola's backstory. I mean, she had some of my favorite lines, right? But I mean, so she's the most seasoned
Dora
officer there, right?
She could throw shade, man.
I mean, she's the one who's like sort of trying to mentor Anika, right? She's the one who's calling her out, being like, "Who are you trying to convince?" Right? So she's been under those constraints even longer than Anika has, and has managed to do it. So I would be interested to see her identity transformation.
And yeah, one thing I like to just really emphasize is that Anika chose this life. And so I'm not blaming the world. What I'm trying to say is anybody who wants to get in a position that she's in has to be in that world as that world is. And you have to organize yourself around that world. And when you get around a bunch of other people who live in that world, you'll complain to each other, but you don't complain to the troops, right? But so I often think that we don't emphasize the agency it took on her part to actually mold her identity to become this, and that's why it's just so hard for her to oh, by the way, we haven't mentioned that she's basically also struggling with the fact that she's betrothed to T'Challa. I mean, yeah, okay, I'll stop.
I mean, but based on that though, like Ayo has the exact same setup, maybe not the same ranking, but you don't just get to join the Dora Milaje. You have to petition and then work and be elected to said space. So it's very interesting to see again that dichotomy, which is why I so wish that this was just its own story and not so rooted into the other Black Panther series, because when you have these two people that one is so like they both have to have the understanding of what the role of the Dora Milaje is supposed to be, as well as the cultural understanding of what T'Challa's role is with regards to the Dora Milaje. Like, yes, they are wives in training, but he is never supposed to actually pick one. It's a very it reminds me of kind of the idea of the British monarchy now. They have title and they are important, but they have no power. It's not a matter of the Queen says this happens and then stuff happens. That's not what it is. It's this duality of all these things that are literally in conflict, but they find this beautiful way to, cohabitate and symbiotically work together. So I think that's one of the weird, like, beautiful pieces about this is they both have that same understanding of what it means to be Dora, but, Ayo is like, but I'm still me. I'm still me. And I know that based on what he's not supposed to do, there's something that I need, and it's you, and Anika is the one that really can't quite wrap her head around that.
If we can come back to the question of favorite line, and I wouldn't call this a favorite line, I'd call this a line that stood out to me, and that is jumping back to Falami and the I am rage. Because she says it again after the original emotional outburst. And every time I saw it, I wanted to say, no, you're misplaced anger, right? It's completely misplaced. Don't take that on. Don't take it on. Right. And so that, I felt that pull. Every time I read it, I felt that line, that repeated line, I felt that pull. And I wanted to somehow do something to get her to understand that that this rage and this power that she has, because she's taking these, what are they called, nanites?
Yep.
Is that the
Nanites.
injections or whatever? How that could be used in much more productive ways. But she's not part of this. I feel like she's not even part of the identity of the Dora, and but she does that to herself early on, where she's constantly separating, you know, because she's the sneaky one. She's spying on people. Well, and then she goes and says, you know, oh, so let me tell you, so and so is doing this, and so is doing that, and that does not go over well. So how are you then creating community with your sister warriors when you're doing this? And so every time I saw I Am Rage, I just wanted to say, no, don't be that. Don't do that.
Rachel, what were you going to say?
Oh gosh, I'm not sure. I'm thinking of something totally different, but I guess just to build off of what Teresa is saying, with like Filome taking like the nanites, it's interesting how she's like using this like advanced technology, this way to like advance her body, to like, you know, avenge her father, whereas Ao uses a different kind of technology to literally change the structure of the Dora Milaje and create this kind of like new wave of warriors. She relies on this like very, very old technology called love, or queer love in particular, you know? So it's like, it's interesting to see that kind of like, because Wakanda, of course, is like the most technologically advanced society in the world. So it's interesting that like in this story, it's like technology is not winning out necessarily. We're going back to like the roots of these human relationships. So that's really interesting.
One of my favorite characters in this story was actually the Black Panther, and in Nation Under Our Feet, you see him struggling with monarchy and knowing some of the backstories that he was dealing with. In Necropolis, he was with Namor because they were trying to prevent an incursion from another universe killing ours and all this kind of stuff. What I love about what current writers are doing with Black Panther is actually, if Wakanda is going to go out to the world and actually interact with the world the way it was set up at the end of the movie, things are going to get ugly fast, right? And there's even a line when you say, yeah, you're letting the Avengers here, and look, they brought all their problems with them, right? And there's even another line in the Nation Under Our Feet where they're bringing some refugees, and someone says, yeah, and you bring their problems with them too, you bring their enemies. So it's this idea that expanding your universe is not a clean enterprise. It's not that we shouldn't do it. Of course we should, but we shouldn't go into it and then find ourselves dissatisfied because things don't work, you know, all nice. That it's not just all nice. Go ahead, Victor, you want to say something?
I do, because that was an undercurrent thing as I was reading this. And it's funny because I realized that I kind of wrote about it in my little aside in the Psychology of Black Panther book. That this is the true hallmark of the notion of Black Panther being written by modern westernized people. We don't know how to rationalize, fictionalize even what the world of Wakanda would actually be like. We don't know how to do it. We keep subjugating T'Challa's, you know, monarchical leadership status or style and the Wakandan people's response to what we know as general people's response to monarchies. But this is a place that has never suffered any of the same, you know, turmoils, things like that. Like it doesn't flow the same way. So like in the sense of T'Challa meeting with Namor and not telling the people why he did it, I think is ridiculous. I don't think Namor would do that, or T'Challa would do that. I think he would openly say, this is what we're doing, and this is why we're doing it. And the people of Wakanda, which is always interesting, and I, like I said, I talked about that in the aside, that it's always interesting that when Wakanda is set upon by an outside force, they are always unified. but there always tends to be these stories within that show like this seedy underbelly that everyone is aiming to try to knock T'Challa down. But I can't understand, how do we get to that place in Wakanda? They should never be in that space, because think of all the things that the leadership of Wakanda has staved off from them. They don't understand the necessity of revolution because they've never had to feel it. So it becomes this really kind of Americanized, for lack of a better term, idea of what we think Wakanda would function as, because we can't seem to think big enough of a place that could have a structure that we kind of understand, but it works perfectly, and we don't understand what that looks like. It was one of those weird things to me. It was like, how come it's always, this weird contest, of the people of Wakanda against the monarchy? Where did that come from? And more to the point of again, one of the things that I really missed, I think was a misstep in this, was the role of the Dora as the brides in training. What happens when T'Challa is no longer king and Shuri is? Now what? Are they no longer the brides in training? And if they are, how does that affect Io and Anika's relationship? Because now there's another woman that you are actually betrothed to. Does that not change the dynamic? Like, those would be the stories that this should definitely be a part of, is how, that evolution of their statutes and their foundations are evolving as, the power shifts in Wakanda happen. But it all stems from this notion of Wakanda being open, not just to the outside world, but to the Wakandan people as well. I don't think that there should be that internal strife and conflict. I'm sorry, I ranted. I apologize.
No. Anyone
No,
else
I think
on
it's
that?
important too, because as I was reading, as a new reader, trying to figure out, I was really shocked by some of the things that were the sort of behind the scenes things that were going on, because I'm like, wait, I thought this didn't happen in this world, and I thought that didn't happen. Okay, well, I haven't read widely, so maybe I just don't know. But it was kind of shocking to me to read some of that, and I'm like, well, I think there I was asking myself, shouldn't there be some other more developed, particularly with the technology where it is, right? This is the most technologically advanced country in the world in this universe. So shouldn't that have somehow fed into solving more of the social problems that they refer to in the story?
Very much so. Like they created problems that don't make sense for this world. Like, this world should be beyond that type of problem. Not saying that it's perfect and doesn't have any problems, but they shouldn't be these kind of problems. These are our problems coming from colonial society, diplomatic, crazy, clashes, not theirs. That's weird. I also thought it was kind of weird, and I'll call it familiarity with T'Challa, where they don't refer to him by a title. They just call him T'Challa, but they don't say that to Shuri. They always call her Queen Shuri. And I was like, well, why is that? What is is there an allowance there that the Dora Milaje have that other people don't have, where they can just call him T'Challa? Like, you're my cousin, you're my friend, I just know you, whatever. But then you have to actually refer to Shuri by her title. Why is there a difference? What is the actual framework here? I think that's my biggest complaint here, is that I think there was a lot of opportunity to explore an evolution of the framework that they really didn't do.
Can I say also that I really wanted to say to T'Challa in general, not just in this story, but like, dude, you're doing too much. You need to focus. You need to focus on Wakanda first, and then from there, like you're messing this up big time because you're spreading yourself too thin. I just wanted to have a talk with him. So maybe that's my thing. I want to have a talk with these characters. So on me. Let's talk about your misplaced anger. T'Challa, let's talk about how you're spreading yourself too thin.
Can we focus, please? T'Challa.
Refocus.
Yeah.
Come on, bring it back.
I actually almost picked one of those conversations with him about spreading himself too thin. I almost picked one of those as my favorite frame, because they're trying to say in the text what the writer feels is wrong with monarchy. The thing is, if I'm T'Challa, I would have said, yo, the dogs of war have got that covered. Wakabi's got that covered. I delegate. And that kind of moment never came up in the story, right? It was as if he were doing everything. I totally agree. I saw them, okay, you are dissecting monarchy, but there are people he does delegate to, and that just never came up. And I did find that a bit, okay.
I agree. I didn't get delegation at all from this
Yeah.
particular collection.
Man, if you're going to do a job like that, you have to delegate. You cannot do it, let alone keep your identity on the hook for all of it turning out well. Any other final comments here?
I will say that this definitely wants something from me. It makes me want to read more. I'm really happy. I'm happy to have been invited to read this text. And as I said, I started reading now Black Panther, and I can see myself going back further and reading the older Black Panthers and really just kind of building my sense of the world. Because I love the pacing of this was quite good. I thought I was excited as I was reading it, and that's a big thing for me. Pacing, if it's too slow, or if the jumps from one issue to another don't quite make sense, there's too much gap filling going on, that I'm like, all right, I need a break, I need a sandwich, I'll come back to you later. But this was, for the most part, it was enough of a page turner that not only was I engaged with it and really interested in, it was exciting, there were some pretty exciting bits, but it has opened up that Black Panther world for me, so I'm looking forward to reading more.
Fantastic. So let's do this. I want to give you all the chance to tell the audience where they can find you on social media if you're interested. And we'll start with Teresa.
I am at DocTeeroh, so it's DocTeeroh on Instagram and on Twitter. And you can also go to if you want to Google my name, Teresa Rojas, you'll find my directory page at the college, and you can get a hold of me through that, or just reach out on social media.
Fantastic. How about you, Eric?
So I'm pretty lame as far as social media goes. Old school, you can just find my email and information at the Department of Psychology's webpage at ISU. You could also Google WGLT Psych Geeks and find the podcast that Scott and I have done, or go to the Normal Theater's film culture page, and you can see my essays there.
Fantastic. How about you, Rachel?
So with my name being what it is, I had to get really creative for my handles online. So I'm on Instagram and Twitter at Girl Gutters, as in comics gutters.
Important to clarify.
And then you can also visit my website, rachelrmiller.com, and read more about my research. Lots of my videos are up over at the SPX YouTube channel if you're interested in watching my interviews as well. So, and thank you for having me so much. This is amazing.
I'm so glad you could join us. Victor.
Hey, I am Victor Dandridge at Vantage In-House on all forms of social media. Definitely hit up my site, vantageinhouse.com, to see what new comic books I'm producing. You can also visit youcreatecomics.com, which is the letter U, CRE, the number 8, comics.com, which will showcase all the different projects and products that we have to inspire you to create your own comics and bring comics into the classroom. You can generally find me every week on YouTube at comictown.tv, where I am co-host of Black, White, and Red All Over, which is a weekly comic book review show. Every now and again, I am the co-host of Hall of Justice podcast, which is available wherever you find podcasts. And I'm in your hopes and dreams right now. I'm just camping out, waiting for you to get here, and we're going to make some cool things in 2021.
Yes.
Fantastic. Well said.
Can I say also thanks to your daughter? What's her name?
Oh, Marissa.
Yes.
Thank you for the shirts. They are beautiful.
I'll be asking her to come say hi to you guys once we're offset. So I'm Scott Jordan. You can find me on YouTube at the Dark Loops Productions channel. It's just called Dark Loops Productions. You can find me on Twitter at dark_loops. You can find me at the Illinois State University's Department of Psychology webpage. And when we're finished here, I'm going to go write a song called Old Technology Called Love. Is that not a killer title for a song?
A great one.
Little cool.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much. So it's just about 8:30 Central Time, and unfortunately, it's time to bring tonight's ReggieCon panel to a close. Again, thanks to all of you for attending. We'll see you here next time when we do our panel in February, where we'll celebrate Black History Month with a discussion of Black Panther. Thanks again to all the people who helped make tonight's panel possible. Eric, Victor, Teresa, and Rachel, thank you so much for being here tonight and sharing your heartfelt admiration for this comic and comics in general. So there it is. From all of us to all of you, be safe and remember, picture where you want to be and read the story until the end. Bye-bye.